The crowded wine-tasting hall in Napa Valley buzzed with laughter and the clink of glasses under golden California sunlight. But Emmanuel felt his entire world tilt the instant Xavier's intense gaze locked onto his from across the long oak table lined with Cabernet flights. That single bold decision to accept Xavier's playful challenge and speak his buried truth aloud would shatter the safe, straight life Emmanuel had scripted for 32 years and pull both men into an emotional storm of identity, loyalty, and irreversible change that neither could escape. Emmanuel adjusted his navy tie, the one his mother had picked for his engagement photos back in Chicago, and tried to focus on the sommelier's lecture about terroir. At 32, he was the youngest partner at a prestigious Loop law firm, engaged to Sarah, whose family golfed with his own conservative Vietnamese-American clan, and outwardly the picture of success. Inside, though, a quiet restlessness had gnawed at him since college, a feeling he labeled stress, ambition, anything but the truth. Xavier, 29, stood opposite in a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, his dark curls catching the light as he swirled a glass with practiced grace. As the Napa-based sommelier for several Michelin-starred restaurants, Xavier had built a life of open honesty after coming out at 19, yet recent heartbreak had left him wary of anything deeper than casual tastings and weekend drives along Highway 1. Their eyes met again when the host announced a blind tasting game. Xavier leaned forward with a half-smile. "Bet you can't guess the vintage on the first sip without looking at the label." Emmanuel laughed, the sound foreign even to himself, and took the dare. One sip, one honest guess that missed wildly, and suddenly they were talking, really talking, about pressure, about pretending, about the weight of expectations that felt heavier than the valley fog. By the time the sun dipped behind the vineyards, the crowd had thinned, but Emmanuel and Xavier lingered at the tasting bar. Xavier poured them both a final glass of bold Zinfandel. "You carry yourself like a man who's winning at life," he said quietly. "But your eyes say you're still waiting for permission to start living it." Emmanuel's throat tightened. No one had ever named the ache so precisely. In that moment the bold decision formed, unbidden and terrifying. He would not fly back to Chicago tomorrow as planned. He would stay the weekend, explore this unexpected connection, and see if the restlessness finally had a name. Xavier offered his guest room in a small cottage overlooking the vines. No strings, just conversation and maybe a hike at dawn. Emmanuel texted Sarah a vague excuse about extended client meetings and followed Xavier's truck up the winding road. That night they sat on the porch until 2 a.m., sharing stories of childhoods, one filled with strict immigrant duty in Chicago's suburbs, the other with free-spirited summers in California's wine country. For the first time Emmanuel felt seen without judgment. When Xavier brushed his hand reaching for the same wine bottle, neither pulled away. The air hummed with possibility, yet neither named it. Emmanuel went to bed promising himself it was only friendship, a harmless detour. Xavier lay awake wondering if he was ready to risk his heart again on someone still chained to a life that didn't fit. Morning brought crisp air and strong coffee. They hiked the trails behind Xavier's cottage, boots crunching on gravel as the valley stretched below them in endless green rows. Emmanuel talked about his upcoming wedding, the pressure from his parents who had sacrificed everything to give him the American dream, the way Sarah's steady kindness made him feel safe but never fully alive. Xavier listened without interrupting, then shared his own scars. The ex who left because Xavier's openness clashed with his family's quiet disapproval back east. The nights he questioned whether being true to himself meant perpetual loneliness. By the ridge overlook they sat shoulder to shoulder, the Pacific breeze carrying hints of salt and earth. "What if you stopped performing for everyone else?" Xavier asked softly. Emmanuel stared at the horizon. "I'd lose everything my family built." Yet the words tasted like the lie they were. That afternoon they drove to a quiet cove beach near Sonoma, skipping stones and laughing like teenagers. Emmanuel's phone buzzed with Sarah's concerned texts. He silenced it. The bold decision had taken root. He would extend his stay another day, then another, letting the connection deepen without yet labeling it love. Xavier cooked a simple dinner of fresh herbs and grilled fish that evening, the kitchen warm with garlic and conversation. They washed dishes side by side, elbows brushing, and Emmanuel realized he had never felt this comfortable in his own skin. When Xavier suggested they attend a local art festival the next morning, Emmanuel agreed without hesitation. For the first time, the restlessness felt like possibility instead of shame. Back in the cottage after the festival, surrounded by local paintings of rolling hills and open skies, Emmanuel finally voiced the fear he had carried across state lines. "I've spent my whole life being the son my parents needed, the fiancé Sarah deserves, the lawyer everyone respects. But standing here, I don't know who I am without those roles." Xavier's eyes softened. "Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone." They talked until the moon rose high, sharing vulnerabilities that felt both terrifying and liberating. Emmanuel slept on the couch that night, heart racing with questions he had never allowed himself to ask. Xavier lay in his room replaying every glance, every shared silence, wondering if this Chicago stranger could be the one who finally made staying open worth the risk. The weekend stretched into Monday, then Tuesday. Emmanuel canceled his return flight. Each new day brought deeper talks, longer walks, and a growing certainty that the decision made over that first glass of wine had already changed the trajectory of two lives forever. He still hadn't told Sarah the full truth, still hadn't named the feeling blooming between them, but the pull toward authenticity grew stronger than the fear of losing the world he once knew. The return to Chicago hit Emmanuel like a cold front off Lake Michigan. He stepped off the plane with Xavier's last text still glowing on his screen. "Safe flight. Call if the city feels too heavy." The weekend in Napa now seemed like a fever dream against the gray skyscrapers and honking taxis. Sarah met him at arrivals with her usual bright smile, hugging him tightly while asking about the client meetings. Emmanuel lied smoothly, the practiced skill of years of hiding, yet the words tasted bitter. That night at their shared apartment, he stared at the ceiling beside her sleeping form, replaying Xavier's laugh, the way his hand had lingered on Emmanuel's shoulder during their final goodbye at the airport shuttle. The bold decision no longer felt distant. It pulsed inside him like a second heartbeat. Work the next morning offered no relief. At the firm, partners praised his latest merger brief, but Emmanuel's mind wandered to Napa's vineyards and the man who had seen through every polished layer. He texted Xavier during lunch. "Chicago feels smaller already." The reply came instantly. "Then come back when you're ready. No pressure." The exchange ignited a secret thread between them. Daily messages that grew from casual updates to late-night confessions about dreams deferred and fears unspoken. Xavier, meanwhile, threw himself into Napa's harvest season, leading private tastings for tourists and consulting for new wineries. Yet every sunset reminded him of Emmanuel's silhouette against the porch railing. He had promised himself after the last breakup he would guard his heart, but Emmanuel's quiet vulnerability had cracked that armor. When a mutual friend from the tasting event invited Xavier to a Chicago conference on sustainable viticulture, he booked the ticket without overthinking. 3 weeks after their meeting, they reunited in a Loop coffee shop, the air thick with autumn rain and unspoken tension. Emmanuel arrived straight from court in his tailored suit, Xavier in jeans and a leather jacket that still carried the faint scent of valley dust. Their hug lasted a beat too long. Over lattes they talked as if no time had passed, but now the stakes felt higher. Emmanuel admitted he had postponed the wedding date citing work stress. Xavier shared that his ex had reached out, stirring old doubts. "I keep wondering if I'm chasing something that can't survive outside Napa's bubble," Xavier said. Emmanuel's answer surprised them both. "What if we test it? Spend a week together here. No hiding, just us figuring this out." The new decision felt even bolder than the first, a deliberate step into unknown territory. The week unfolded in stolen moments. Xavier stayed at a boutique hotel near the Riverwalk while Emmanuel juggled court appearances and secret evenings. They wandered Millennium Park at dusk, fingers brushing under the Cloud Gate sculpture, sharing quiet dinners in tucked-away bistros where no one knew them. Emmanuel introduced Xavier to his favorite deep dish spot, laughing when sauce dripped onto Xavier's chin. In return, Xavier cooked a Napa-inspired meal in the hotel kitchenette, teaching Emmanuel to taste notes of cherry and earth the way he had that first day. Conversations turned intimate. Emmanuel spoke of his father's quiet disappointment when he chose law over the family import business, the way his mother's expectations wrapped around him like invisible vines. Xavier opened about the night his parents in upstate New York had asked him to tone it down for holidays, the ache of loving them while refusing to shrink. One rainy afternoon, they sat in Xavier's hotel room watching the lake churn, and Emmanuel finally said the words he had practiced in mirrors. "I think I'm falling for you." Xavier's response was gentle, a hand on Emmanuel's knee. "Then let's fall together, but honestly. No more half-lives." That night they shared their first real kiss, soft and full of promise, the city lights blurring outside the window. It was not passion's frenzy but a quiet claiming, a seal on the decision that had begun over wine glasses weeks earlier. Yet reality pressed in. Sarah grew suspicious of Emmanuel's late nights and distant mood. His best friend Marcus, a fellow lawyer who had known him since law school, cornered him in the office gym. "You're different, man. What's going on?" Emmanuel deflected, but the lie sat heavy. Back in Napa after the week, Xavier faced his own crossroads when his restaurant owner offered a promotion that required more travel, potentially pulling him away from the valley he loved. The distance between Chicago and California now felt symbolic of the larger gap. Emmanuel's closeted world versus Xavier's open one. They video called nightly, mapping out plans that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Emmanuel promised to tell Sarah soon. Xavier vowed patience. The emotional journey had accelerated, each man confronting the internal conflict between safety and authenticity, between the families that raised them and the future calling them forward. Small misunderstandings arose, a missed text interpreted as doubt, a work deadline that shortened a call, yet they talked through each one, learning that real connection required effort beyond the initial spark. By Thanksgiving, Emmanuel realized the bold decision had evolved into a commitment, one that demanded he begin dismantling the life he had built on pretense. Thanksgiving at Emmanuel's family home in suburban Naperville became the first real fracture. The house smelled of turmeric and roasted turkey, his mother's Vietnamese-American fusion dishes crowding the table alongside his father's prized wine collection. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his knee, while cousins chattered about weddings and promotions. Emmanuel smiled through the meal, but every laugh felt hollow. Xavier's texts arrived discreetly under the table. "Thinking of you. Remember the Zinfandel we shared?" That simple reminder steadied him until his father raised a glass. "To Emmanuel and Sarah, the future of this family." The toast landed like a stone in Emmanuel's chest. Later, helping with dishes, his mother pulled him aside. "You've seemed far away lately, Con. Everything okay with Sarah?" He mumbled reassurance, but the guilt twisted deeper. That night he drove Sarah home in silence, then sat alone in his car outside his apartment and called Xavier. "I can't keep doing this. The pretending is suffocating." Xavier's voice across the miles was calm. "Then don't. But do it for you, not for me." The conversation stretched past midnight, Emmanuel voicing fears of disappointing parents who had fled war-torn Vietnam for his opportunities. Xavier shared stories of his own family's slow acceptance after years of awkward holidays. By the call's end, Emmanuel had made another layered decision. He would tell Sarah after the new year, giving himself time to prepare the words that would upend 3 lives. Winter brought blizzards to Chicago and rain to Napa, mirroring the turbulence inside both men. Emmanuel threw himself into work, landing a major corporate client that required late nights. Yet his mind constantly drifted to Xavier planning harvest events. They flew to meet midway in Denver for a weekend, renting a cabin in the mountains where snow muffled the world outside. There, wrapped in blankets by the fire, they spoke of futures. Emmanuel considered transferring to the firm's San Francisco office. Xavier explored consulting roles that allowed more flexibility. The conversations felt adult and hopeful, yet cracks appeared. Xavier admitted jealousy when Emmanuel posted a photo with Sarah at a firm gala, even though it was required. Emmanuel confessed anxiety about Xavier's social circle of openly gay friends who seemed so comfortable in their skin. They resolved each tension with honesty, learning that love demanded patience and self-examination. Back home, Emmanuel began small acts of courage, skipping a family dinner with a vague excuse, researching LGBTQ support groups at his firm. Xavier encouraged without pushing, sending photos of the valley waking to spring buds as a reminder of possibility. Spring arrived with new pressures. Sarah planned their engagement party for May, inviting both families. Emmanuel's internal crisis peaked during a sleepless night staring at the ring box on his dresser. He texted Xavier at 3 a.m., "I feel like I'm drowning in expectations." Xavier replied immediately, "Then swim toward what keeps you breathing." The metaphor stuck. Emmanuel started therapy quietly, a step he had once dismissed as weakness. Sessions unearthed childhood memories of hiding his differences to fit the model minority mold his parents prized. Meanwhile, Xavier faced his own test when his ex reappeared at a wine festival, stirring old wounds and prompting Xavier to question if his growing attachment to Emmanuel was genuine or a rebound. They argued over the phone for the first time, voices sharp with hurt, yet the disagreement ended in mutual apologies and deeper understanding. The bold decision that began at the tasting now required daily recommitment, choosing truth over comfort, vulnerability over silence. Emmanuel canceled a family trip to Vietnam, citing work but really needing space to breathe. Xavier declined a lucrative European consulting gig to stay closer to their budding plans. Each sacrifice carved space for growth, turning two separate men into partners navigating the same emotional terrain. By late spring, Emmanuel stood at a crossroads. The firm offered him partnership with a hefty bonus, contingent on his stable family image. Sarah sensed distance and suggested couples counseling. His parents called weekly with wedding venue suggestions. The weight felt crushing until Xavier sent a plane ticket for a long weekend in Napa. Emmanuel accepted, knowing the trip would force clarity. Landing in San Francisco, he rented a car and drove straight to the cottage where it all started. Xavier waited on the porch, sunlight catching his curls exactly as it had months earlier. Their embrace carried months of longing and uncertainty. Over dinner on the same porch, Emmanuel finally voiced the truth he had rehearsed. "I love you, and I'm ready to stop hiding." Xavier's eyes shone with relief and fear. "Then we face whatever comes next together." That weekend they walked the vineyards again, mapping practical steps. Emmanuel would come out to Sarah first, then his parents, then the firm. Xavier would support from California while exploring a move closer to Chicago if needed. The internal conflicts that once paralyzed them now fueled resolve. Yet both knew the road ahead held family confrontations and societal pushback. The journey of growth had only begun. The confrontation with Sarah unfolded in their apartment on a rainy June evening. Emmanuel had rehearsed the words for weeks, yet when she walked in from work his voice still cracked. "I care about you deeply, but I'm not in love the way you deserve. There's someone else, and he's a man." Sarah's face crumpled in slow motion, shock giving way to anger, then a quiet sadness that cut deeper than yelling. All this time? The engagement, the plans? She demanded details, and Emmanuel gave them honestly without graphic excess, explaining the wine tasting, the slow awakening, the love that felt like coming home. She cried, accused him of betrayal, then asked the question that haunted him, "Did you ever really love me?" His answer was painful truth. "I loved the idea of the life we were building, but not the man I was pretending to be." She asked for space. Emmanuel packed a bag and stayed at a hotel, heart heavy with guilt yet lighter with honesty. The next morning he called his parents, voice shaking as he told them he needed to talk in person. His mother's silence on the phone felt louder than any argument. Xavier flew to Chicago the same week, arriving with quiet strength and a suitcase of clothes for an indefinite stay. They rented a small Airbnb near the lake, a neutral space to process the fallout. Xavier held Emmanuel through nights of doubt, reminding him that growth demanded courage. "You didn't choose to be who you are, but you chose to live it. That's the bold part. Together they faced the family dinner Emmanuel had scheduled. His parents arrived at the restaurant stiff with worry, his father clutching a bottle of Vietnamese rice wine as if it could anchor the evening. Emmanuel introduced Xavier simply, "This is Xavier. He's the reason I finally understand myself." The silence stretched. His mother whispered in Vietnamese, asking if this was a phase, if therapy could fix it. His father stared at his plate, face tight with disappointment born of cultural expectations and immigrant survival. Xavier spoke gently, sharing his own journey of acceptance, acknowledging their fears without defensiveness. The dinner ended in strained goodbyes, no hugs, no blessings. Driving home, Emmanuel wept for the first time in years, mourning the version of himself his family had loved. Xavier reminded him softly, "They need time. You gave them truth. Now give them space to grow too." Society's prejudices surfaced next. At the firm, rumors spread after Sarah's friends whispered. Partners pulled Emmanuel aside, citing image concerns for client relations. One senior associate, a longtime ally, offered support but warned of subtle backlash. Emmanuel's best friend Marcus distanced himself awkwardly, canceling basketball nights with vague excuses. The isolation stung, yet Xavier's steady presence anchored him. They spent evenings cooking simple meals in the Airbnb, talking through each hurt. Xavier shared his own past experiences with family rejection during college, how therapy and chosen family had rebuilt him. Emmanuel began attending a local LGBTQ support group, listening to stories that mirrored his own and finding strength in community. Misunderstandings arose between the couple too. Xavier felt sidelined when Emmanuel prioritized damage control at work. Emmanuel worried Xavier missed Napa's freedom. They resolved each with open dialogue, learning that love required active maintenance amid external storms. A weekend trip back to Napa offered breathing room. Walking the familiar trails, they reaffirmed their commitment. Emmanuel resigned from the firm partnership track, choosing authenticity over prestige. The sacrifice cost him financial security but gained him inner peace. Xavier turned down a promotion to stay flexible for their future. Each choice deepened their bond, transforming initial attraction into a partnership forged in fire. Summer brought tentative reconciliation attempts. Emmanuel's mother called first, voice tentative, inviting him for coffee alone. She listened more than spoke, admitting her fear stemmed from wanting him protected in a world that had already demanded so much. His father remained distant but sent a short text after weeks. "We love you. We just need time." Sarah returned his belongings with a note wishing him happiness, a grace that humbled him. Xavier's family in New York heard the news through video calls and responded with cautious curiosity, asking to meet Emmanuel someday. The external pressures eased slightly, yet internal work continued. Emmanuel journaled daily, tracing his growth from the man who hid behind suits to one who owned his truth. Xavier reflected on how loving Emmanuel had healed his own trust issues. Together they volunteered at a local pride planning committee, finding purpose in helping others navigate similar journeys. The bold decision that started at a wine tasting table had rippled outward, reshaping careers, families, and self-perception. Yet one final test loomed. A large family gathering in Chicago where both sides would converge. The family gathering in late August was meant to celebrate his cousin's graduation but became the unintended stage for Emmanuel's deepest crisis. Tables filled the backyard with Vietnamese dishes and American barbecue, children running between chairs while adults toasted with wine from his father's collection. Xavier attended at Emmanuel's side, dressed simply yet confidently, a quiet show of solidarity. Tension simmered from the moment they arrived. Whispers followed them. An uncle asked pointed questions about this friend. Emmanuel's mother tried mediating with nervous smiles. His father avoided eye contact. Midway through the meal, Sarah appeared unexpectedly, invited by a well-meaning aunt who hadn't heard the full story. The air thickened. Sarah approached their table politely, congratulating Xavier on whatever this is. But her eyes betrayed lingering pain. Emmanuel felt the old guilt surge, compounded by Xavier's subtle withdrawal. Later, in the kitchen, his father cornered him. "You chose this over everything we sacrificed? Over Sarah? Over stability?" The words landed like blows. Emmanuel defended quietly, explaining that authenticity was not a choice but a necessity. Yet his father's disappointment cut deep. Outside, Xavier faced his own confrontation when Marcus, emboldened by drinks, pulled him aside and accused him of stealing Emmanuel from a good life. Xavier responded with calm facts, refusing to escalate, but the encounter left him shaken. That night back at the Airbnb, arguments erupted between Emmanuel and Xavier for the first time in months. Emmanuel accused Xavier of being too detached during the gathering. Xavier countered that Emmanuel still sought his family's approval at the expense of their relationship. Hurtful words flew, rooted in exhaustion and fear. "Maybe I was just a phase for you," Xavier said quietly before stepping onto the balcony. Emmanuel sat alone, replaying the day's betrayals and realizing how much he had asked Xavier to endure. The misunderstanding widened until Emmanuel joined him outside, apologizing first. They talked until dawn, unpacking layers of insecurity. Emmanuel's lingering people-pleasing, Xavier's fear of being secondary to family duty. Reconciliation came through tears and renewed promises. The bold decision now required repairing the rifts it had caused. Xavier suggested a break to process, but Emmanuel refused. "We've come too far to retreat." They decided on couples counseling together, a practical step toward maturity. Fall arrived with fresh challenges. Emmanuel started a new role at a smaller firm focused on civil rights, work that aligned with his growth but paid less. Xavier accepted a consulting position in Chicago, relocating permanently to share an apartment they chose together near the lake. The move symbolized commitment yet brought adjustment struggles. Xavier missed the vineyards. Emmanuel navigated his parents' slow thaw. A betrayal surfaced when an old colleague leaked details of Emmanuel's coming out to clients, costing him a major case. The setback tested their resilience. Xavier supported him through late nights of doubt, reminding him that true success measured by integrity, not titles. Emmanuel in turn encouraged Xavier to host pop-up wine tastings in Chicago, blending their worlds. Family progress came incrementally. Emmanuel's mother visited their apartment, bringing homemade pho and tentatively asking about Xavier's work. His father sent a case of wine with a note, "For your table." Small gestures, yet milestones. The emotional journey had taught both men that healing required patience and that love meant standing firm amid backlash. A final misunderstanding nearly derailed them when Xavier's ex visited Chicago for business and texted old memories. Emmanuel discovered the messages and felt jealousy twist into accusation. Xavier explained honestly, deleting the contact and reaffirming his choice. The incident forced deeper trust-building exercises from counseling. They emerged stronger, understanding that past shadows required active light. By winter holidays, they hosted a small chosen family dinner, blending traditions. Xavier's California wines alongside Emmanuel's mother's recipes. Laughter filled the space, proof that growth had created new belonging. The holiday season solidified their path. Emmanuel and Xavier stood together at a New Year's Eve gathering with friends from the support group, watching fireworks over the lake. Emmanuel's parents had declined the invitation but sent a card with genuine well wishes. Sarah had moved on, texting occasional friendly updates. The firm battles had settled into quiet acceptance at the new workplace. Xavier's Napa friends visited, bringing stories and laughter that bridged coasts. Looking back across the months since that wine tasting, both men marveled at the transformation. Emmanuel no longer performed roles, he lived his truth. Xavier no longer guarded his heart. He invested it fully. Their love had weathered identity crises, family rejections, societal whispers, and internal doubts, emerging as a partnership rooted in mutual growth. Sacrifices, once terrifying, now felt like necessary steps toward authenticity. The bold decision that began with a single dare over Cabernet had rewritten their stories, proving that courage compounds when shared. On a quiet January morning, they returned to Napa for a weekend, walking the same trails where everything started. The vineyards slept under winter vines, yet promise hummed beneath. Emmanuel turned to Xavier at the ridge overlook, the Pacific breeze familiar and new. "I wouldn't change a single choice," Xavier smiled, taking his hand. "Neither would I." They stood in silence, two men who had faced the world and chosen each other. The journey continued, but the foundation was solid. True or false? One bold decision made in a single moment of honesty can truly redeem a lifetime of hiding and heal the relationships it once threatened.